At my parents' anniversary dinner, my sister leaned over and said, "Here's to the family disappointment who still thinks they're important." My mom laughed. I stayed quiet. That night, I pulled my signature from the loan on their new house. And at 8:40 a.m., they got the news, after which my dad desperately called me 38 times in a row. It was an evening when I was already burned out. Weeks of subtle digs, last-minute emergencies, I was expected to fund, and the constant sense that my role in this family was more bank account than son had pushed me past the limit. By the time I drove to the restaurant for my parents' anniversary dinner, I had already decided this couldn't keep going. And my sister, with her smug little superiority act, needed to be put in her place. I knew exactly what my first move would be. The decision had been building for months. I'd bailed my sister out of credit card debt 3 times, paid for my parents' roof repairs when they forgot their insurance didn't cover it, and even covered my dad's medical bills when he just needed a little help. Until payday. Not once had any of them acted like it was anything more than my duty. No thanks, no acknowledgement. Just the expectation that I'd always be there with my wallet open. The restaurant was one of their favorites. Dim lighting, white tablecloths, the hum of conversations that made you lean in to hear each other. I already knew I'd be paying for everything, like I always did, but I didn't care this time. Tonight, I wasn't counting the bill. I was counting the hours until the first crack in their perfect little setup appeared. We were halfway through dessert when it happened. My sister leaned across the table, her eyes locked on mine, champagne glass in hand. She smiled, that half smirk she uses when she wants to get a reaction, and said, "Here's to the family disappointment who still thinks they're important." My mom laughed. Not a polite, awkward laugh. A real, unfiltered one. My dad stayed quiet, but he didn't look surprised. I just sipped my coffee and kept my face blank. Silence has a way of making people think they've won. What none of them knew was that they were sitting there with someone holding the key to something they couldn't afford to lose: the mortgage on their new house. The bank had only approved it because I signed on as guarantor. Without me, the deal would collapse. By the time I got home, the decision I'd been considering for weeks became action. I pulled the loan paperwork from my desk drawer, called the bank, and told them I wanted my name removed immediately. The woman on the phone confirmed I could do it in person that night, so I drove over, signed the withdrawal form, and handed it back. My signature was clean, deliberate. Final. I didn't send a message or make a call. I wanted the discovery to hit them like cold water. At exactly 8:40 the next morning, my phone lit up. My dad's name appeared, and when I didn't answer, it appeared again. And again. 38 calls in a row. On the 39th, I picked up. He didn't even say hello. The bank had contacted them. The loan was no longer secured. He wanted me to fix it immediately, as if all it would take was a phone call. I told him I had work to do and hung up. The silence after that was better than any toast. By noon the day after the anniversary dinner, the storm had already started. My phone lit up with a message from my sister. No apology, no sign she even remembered what she'd said over dessert. Just a short, sharp line: "You've really screwed us over." I stared at it for a moment, then locked my phone without replying. Around 1 p.m., my mom called. She didn't jump straight to the loan, she started weaving the usual emotional net. She told me how my dad hadn't touched his breakfast, how he'd been pacing around the house, muttering about losing everything. Then she dropped the phrase I'd heard my whole life: "We're family. We don't do this to each other." I told her I had work to finish and ended the call before she could pivot to guilt. 2 hours later, I got a call from my Uncle Dean. He almost never reaches out unless there's a wedding or funeral, so his sudden interest was obvious. He tried to start light, asking about my job, pretending to remember the name of my coworker. Then, casually, he mentioned he'd heard my parents were going through something, and maybe I could step in, just to get them through the rough patch. I told him it wasn't his concern and hung up before he could start preaching about family loyalty. That evening, my sister tried again. This time she called, her tone softer, almost rehearsed. She said she'd been thinking a lot about what she'd said at the restaurant. For a second, I thought she might actually be owning up to it. Then she followed it with, "If you just sign the papers again, we can put all this behind us." It wasn't an apology. It was a transaction. She wanted the benefit without the accountability. The following morning, I ran into my parents in the grocery store. The odds of it being accidental were about 0. My mom walked up immediately, bypassing any small talk, and told me they'd been up all night searching online for temporary apartments they couldn't even afford. My dad stood behind her, not saying a word, but his stare was heavy. It wasn't the look of someone asking for help. It was the look of someone who believed they were owed it. Over the next 3 days, the pressure campaign became a full operation. A cousin texted me saying I should think about the long-term damage I was causing. A family friend called, just to check in, but quickly shifted into telling me I was making a big mistake and that my parents had always been there for me, which was funny, because I could list a dozen times they hadn't. My sister even sent me a photo of her kids with a caption about how this will affect them too, as if my refusal to co-sign a mortgage was going to put her children in danger. They all avoided talking about the dinner. No one mentioned the toast or my mom's laugh. They skipped straight to the problem I'd created, twisting it so it sounded like I was sabotaging them out of spite, not drawing a line they had crossed one too many times. I stayed quiet through all of it. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. Every unanswered call, every ignored text seemed to make them more frantic. Because they still didn't know I wasn't finished. By the 4th day, it was clear they thought time was on their side. My phone had turned into a revolving door of calls and texts, sometimes from them directly, sometimes from people I hadn't spoken to in years. They were running the same playbook they'd always used: box me in until the pressure became unbearable, then wait for me to cave just to make it stop. What they didn't realize was that I'd already decided this wasn't just about the mortgage anymore. Pulling my name off the loan was only the opening shot. If I left even one escape route open, they'd find it and keep the pattern going. So I started thinking about every financial link between us, every account, every bill, every temporary arrangement that had quietly turned permanent. That's when I remembered the joint account. Years ago, it had been pitched as a backup plan for family emergencies. I was in my early 20s then, still buying into the idea that helping them was part of my role as a good son. But over time, the withdrawals started, 50 here, 100 there, always small enough to avoid setting off alarm bells. I'd been watching the activity for months now, tracking how the money never went toward actual emergencies. Half the time, it was restaurants, weekend trips, or gifts, for people I barely knew. I went to the bank after work that night. No calls, no warnings, no explanations. Just a quiet walk to the counter and a request to close the account. The teller was polite, asked if I wanted to keep it open, in case I changed my mind. I told her there was no chance of that. The balance went straight into my private savings, and the account ceased to exist. The reaction was immediate. At 7 a.m. the next morning, my mom called, her voice carrying the sharp edge that always came out when she realized she'd lost leverage. She didn't bother pretending she didn't know. She just asked why the account was suddenly empty, and if I had any idea how much harder I just made things for them. I said I knew exactly what I'd done. Then I ended the call. A few hours later, my sister tried a different approach. She showed up at my apartment without warning, holding a folder thick with mortgage documents. She didn't even say hello, just told me if I signed again, this whole mess could disappear, and no one would have to keep arguing. When I told her I wasn't interested, she shifted instantly from fake concern to irritation. At one point, she actually wedged her foot in the door so I couldn't close it. I closed it anyway. By evening, the extended family had joined in. My cousin sent a long message about how I was damaging relationships that took a lifetime to build. An aunt I barely knew called to tell me she was disappointed in me. A family friend tried to guilt me by saying my parents were too proud to admit how badly they needed me, which was absurd considering they'd spent the past week telling everyone exactly how badly they needed me. They all kept talking about what I was taking away from them. Not one of them talked about the years I'd already given. That night, sitting in my apartment, I realized something. They still didn't believe this was permanent. They were treating it like a tantrum, something I'd eventually get over when I'd made my point. They thought they just had to outlast me. But this wasn't about winning an argument anymore. This was about breaking a cycle and making sure it stayed broken. And they had no idea what was coming next. By the end of the week, it felt like I was under a microscope. My phone barely stayed silent for more than an hour. Unknown numbers, blocked calls, sudden texts from people I hadn't heard from in years, all of them linked to someone who claimed they were just checking in. But every conversation, no matter how it started, ended up circling back to the same topic, the house. They had turned this into a coordinated campaign. My sister was the strategist, my mom the emotional anchor, my dad the enforcer. Everyone else was just a messenger. That Saturday morning, I left my apartment early to pick up a few things. I wanted a quiet day, maybe even a break from thinking about any of this. I stopped at a grocery store across town, figuring it was far enough away to avoid any accidental encounters. When I walked out with my bags, my stomach dropped. My dad was leaning against my car like he'd been waiting for hours. My mom was sitting in the passenger seat, holding a manila folder on her lap. Either of them smiled. I didn't have to guess how they'd found me. Later, I'd learned my sister had used an old rideshare account we'd both forgotten about. Apparently, my payment info was still linked to hers, and she'd been tracking my rides and purchases all week. Before I could even speak, my dad launched into it. He said the bank had given them one final window to salvage the mortgage, 3 days before the agreement would collapse. My mom jumped in, saying they'd lose their deposit, their custom furniture order, and the dream home they'd been planning for months. Then she pulled a stack of papers from the folder and held them out like a peace offering. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a signature trap. They'd filled everything out already. All I had to do was sign. Right there in the parking lot. I told them I wasn't signing anything. That's when the tone shifted. My dad stepped closer, his voice low but sharp. He said I was letting outside influences poison my loyalty to my family. He told me I'd regret this when they were gone someday. He didn't even bother to hide that it was emotional blackmail. My mom stayed quiet, just staring like she expected me to break at any second. I didn't. I walked past them, unlocked my car, and left without looking back. That night, I came home to find something waiting under my apartment door, an unmarked envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from my sister. She opened with a half apology about things getting out of hand at the dinner, then jumped straight to promising that if I just signed the loan again, she never asked me for anything ever again. I'd heard versions of that promise since I was 18. It had never once been true. But the letter wasn't the real surprise. Tucked inside was a folded receipt from a luxury resort in Florida. 2 rooms. My sister's name on one, my parents on the other. Thousands of dollars for a family getaway, 3 weeks earlier. The dates lined up perfectly, just days after they'd called me to say they were barely staying afloat and needed my help to keep from losing the house. The next morning, I checked my email and saw something that made my hands tighten on the mouse. An automated notification from the bank. My name had been listed as an emergency contact on 2 of their other accounts. Ones I'd forgotten about because they hadn't touched them in years. They'd quietly added me again last month. It wasn't just about the mortgage. They had contingency plans for dragging me back in, even if I blocked one route. And that was the moment it hit me. This wasn't about survival. This was about control. They weren't struggling to stay above water. They just didn't want to swim without me holding them up. For the first time, I felt no hesitation about my next step. If they wanted to make this a game, I was going to end it on my terms. After the resort receipt and the bank notification, something inside me locked into place. The entire week had been them clawing at the walls I'd started building, trying to find any crack, any loose brick to push through. They weren't in trouble, not really. They were in panic mode because for the first time in years, they didn't have a guarantee that I'd be there to bail them out. I decided the mortgage wasn't the real problem anymore. The real problem was the number of open doors they still had into my life. If I didn't close them all, this would just start again the next time they felt entitled to something. The first was obvious. That emergency contact, listing on their bank accounts, the one I'd been reminded of by the automated email, had to go. I went to the bank in person and had my name removed from every account they owned. While I was there, I asked the teller to put a permanent note on my profile: no joint accounts, no additions, no exceptions without my in-person approval and ID. She hesitated and asked if there was a specific incident. I told her it was a recurring issue. Next, I started checking for every other place my name might be quietly attached to their finances. It took an entire evening of combing through old emails, account notifications, and even paper statements I'd kept in a filing box. Sure enough, I found I was still listed as a secondary policyholder on their home and auto insurance. Being on there gave them the ability to authorize charges that could hit me directly under certain conditions. One call to the insurance company fixed that. along with a password lock that only I knew. I didn't tell them about any of this. If they were going to discover it, I wanted it to be at the moment they tried to use me and couldn't. 2 days later, my sister called. This time she didn't even pretend it was about talking things through or rebuilding trust. She said they had a plan to fix everything and that I just needed to play along for a little while. I kept my voice neutral and asked what she meant. She slipped, or maybe she wanted to brag, and told me they were reapplying for the mortgage through a different bank, and all they need from me was a quick signature at the end. She claimed I wouldn't even have to deal with the payments, it would just be a formality. What she didn't know was that earlier that morning, I'd already been tipped off. One of the loan officers at that bank had been a guy I went to high school with. He messaged me on social media. "Hey man, your name's on a mortgage application that just came across my desk. Did you mean for that to happen?" The anger I felt wasn't loud. It was cold, calculated, the kind that made decisions stick. That night I wrote one email. No drama, no drawn-out explanations. Just facts. I sent it to my parents, my sister, and every relative who had called, texted, or accidentally bumped into me since this started. It read, "I will not be providing financial support of any kind now or in the future. Any attempt to involve my name, accounts, or signature in your financial matters will be considered fraud and reported immediately." Then I added one final line. "Family is about respect. You've made it clear you have none for mine." The replies came quickly. My sister's was pure rage, accusations, name-calling, even a thinly veiled threat that I'd regret cutting ties. My mom's email was 3 paragraphs of guilt, every sentence designed to make me imagine her crying while she typed it. My dad didn't reply at all, but by the next morning, my number was blocked on his phone. For the first time in weeks, my phone was quiet. But I knew better than to think quiet meant it was over. There was still one thing left I needed to do, the move that would make it impossible for them to ever drag me back into this again. And I was ready to make it. 2 days after I sent that email, the quiet felt almost unnatural. No calls. No messages. No accidental sightings at the grocery store. For a moment, I wondered if maybe they'd finally realized it was over. Then, at 6:45 a.m. on a Thursday, I heard a knock. Slow, deliberate. When I checked the peephole, my sister was standing there, hair still damp like she'd rushed over, phone in one hand and a thin, practiced smile. I didn't open the door. Through the wood, she said they'd figured something out, and that she just wanted to explain it to me in person. Her tone was light at first, almost casual, but there was a sharpness underneath. When I didn't respond, she shifted to reminding me of everything we've been through as a family, and how this was our last chance to fix it. I stayed silent. She knocked one more time, then left. I thought that was the end of it for the day. It wasn't. That afternoon, I got a call from my HR department. Someone had phoned them pretending to be me, asking questions about my payroll and health benefits. They said the caller was persistent, pressing for details that no legitimate person would ask for. HR shut it down and reported it to me immediately. The number traced back to a prepaid phone from my parents' area. It wasn't desperation anymore. It was escalation. That night, I decided it was time for my final move, the one that would make it legally, financially, and practically impossible for them to get their hands on anything connected to me. I drove to my attorney's office with a stack of files, my will, my insurance policies, my beneficiary forms, my old power of attorney paperwork. Some of these documents hadn't been touched in years, but they still had my parents' or sister's names on them. In 3 hours, every single one was updated. No family members remained on anything. My estate went to a charity and a trusted friend. My life insurance named 2 non-relatives. The power of attorney was shredded and replaced with a new one they'd never see. My lawyer placed all my updated documents in a sealed file with instructions for immediate legal action if anyone tried to forge my involvement in anything. By the time I left, I knew with absolute certainty there was not a single account, policy, or legal form they could exploit. If they tried, it would be fraud, and I'd have a paper trail ready to hand over to the police. The next morning, I sent one last message to my parents, my sister, and every relative who'd taken part in this. It was a single sentence. There is nothing left to discuss. For the past week, there's been silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace, but like the deep breath someone takes before their next move. I've been here before. I know them too well. They don't quit. They regroup. They look for weaknesses. They convince themselves that if they just wait long enough, I'll drop my guard. But this time, there's nothing to drop. Every door is locked. Every key is gone. Every bridge they might have crossed has been burned to ash. So when the day comes, and I know it will, when they try again, I won't be the one scrambling for answers. I'll be the one writing the update. And it won't be the ending they're hoping for. Final update. It's been 6 months since I sent that single line to my family. There is nothing left to discuss. For weeks after that, there was total silence. No calls. No texts. No strange, coincidental encounters. It was like the air had finally cleared. I started to believe maybe they'd finally accepted reality, that the financial leash was cut and I wasn't putting the collar back on. Then, 2 weeks ago, the silence cracked. I got a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. My dad's voice was on the other end, thinner than I remembered, telling me it was urgent that I call him back. He didn't explain why, and I didn't need to hear the rest. I didn't call him back. Later that day, an old neighbor from my parents' street sent me a message on Facebook. She said the house, the dream home they'd fought so hard for and turned into the hill they were willing to die on, was gone. The bank had taken it. From what she told me, the loan had unraveled months ago. After I pulled my name from the mortgage, they'd scraped together just enough to keep it afloat for a little while, probably hoping I'd cave. But the payments were too high, and they couldn't keep up without a guarantor to refinance. In desperation, they tried renting it out to cover costs, but the tenants were late on payments and eventually bailed mid-lease. That was the last straw for the bank. It gets worse for them. Apparently, my sister had stepped in with her own solution. She'd taken out a personal loan to help with the mortgage after the collapse. She told the lender she had a stable income, which wasn't exactly true, and when she couldn't keep up, the lender came after her. She sold her car to make a few payments, but the debt just kept growing. Her credit score plummeted into the low 500s. The same sister who mocked me at the anniversary dinner now can't even co-sign for a basic apartment lease. My parents ended up moving into a cramped rental on the other side of town. The same uncle who lectured me at the start of this mess about family loyalty is the one who covered their deposit. According to another cousin, he's already regretting it because my parents have been late with the rent twice in 4 months. The final piece fell into place last week. My lawyer forwarded me a letter from one of the banks they'd gone to after the first mortgage collapsed. They tried applying for another loan, and once again, they tried listing me as a guarantor without my knowledge. My standing fraud warning and the updated legal paperwork I'd put in place months ago triggered the bank's fraud department. Within 24 hours, the application was dead, and the bank formally blacklisted them from future loans. And that was it. No more angles. No more backup plans. No more ways to drag me back into their mess. I didn't have to confront them. I didn't have to block their numbers again. I didn't even have to speak to them. The weight of their own choices crushed them without me lifting a finger. Now there's nothing left, no strained calls, no holiday gatherings, no subtle digs while I pick up the check. Just absence. A complete severing. People think that kind of ending comes with guilt. That you'll lie awake at night replaying the what-ifs, and wondering if you should have done more. But here's the truth, I feel lighter than I have in years. The constant low-level tension, the unspoken expectation that I'd always be there to fix things, it's gone. They're left with the consequences they created. And I'm left with peace. They've run out of moves. And I've run out of reasons to care. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about that night at the anniversary dinner, the champagne glass in my sister's hand, my mom laughing, my dad staying silent. I used to replay it with anger. Now I see it differently. That was the moment they told me exactly how they valued me, and I finally listened. Friends have asked if I'd ever let them back into my life. I tell them the truth, not in the way they want. I can be civil if paths cross someday, but the bank of Alex is permanently closed. Respect has an account balance too, and they overdrew it years ago. Maybe one day they'll see what they lost. But by then, I'll be too far ahead to hear them.